Welcome to the June 2025 Franklin Township Planning Board meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mr. Branch?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Doyle? Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Mulady?
Here.
Mr. Slade?
Here.
Mr. Ransom? Mr. Kapoor? Mayor Bruno?
Here.
Mr. Carvalho?
Here.
Chairman Peck?
Mr. Pesh, our chairman, is not present this evening. He has a grandchild graduating from Delsea Regional, and I will fill in as chairperson. We have a statement from our solicitor this evening.
We will allow public comment tonight on two ordinances, 0525 and 0725, and the application for the affordable housing element and fair share plan. Those are the topics that will be announced in the public comment. When you come up, if you want to make public comment, you will be sworn. State your name, spell your full name, give us your address, and speak directly into the microphone. Don't touch it. Speak into it because the meeting is recorded. We want to record all comments. Okay? Thank you.
Okay. First on tonight's agenda is Resolution PB 25-1, Patriot Homes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. I'm sorry, somebody else made it out. I'll take the second.
Mr. Branch?
Yes.
Mr. Mulady?
Yes.
Mr. Slade?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Carvalho?
Yes. Motion approved. Resolution approved. Next on the agenda is Resolution SB 2503, Sahara Sand. Is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve SB 25-03.
So,
Roll call, please.
Mr. Branch?
yes.
Mr. Mulady?
Yes.
Mr. Slade?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Carvalho?
Yes. Next on tonight's agenda is our housing plan, fourth round, formerly known as COA, Coalition of Affordable Housing. Can we have a report, Mr. Planner?
Sure. Thank you. For the record, Chris Stockley, Planner, the Association, contracted by the township, very long. A housing plan, always a fair share plan, as required by the Fair Housing Act, which was ended last year. And set forth a lot of very strict timelines, short timelines for fair housing plans to address the fourth round of affordable housing, which I think all of you up here were on this board, except for maybe Mr. Brandt, who was probably in the audience at the time. Not even 2 years ago, we had finally got through the process of the third round settlement, adopting a housing plan. We're now starting the fourth round. Technically starts July 1st of this year, begins the fourth round of affordable housing, run to the 30th of 2040 or 2035. It's a 10-year affordable housing round where the state has calculated obligations for every town in the state. Essentially, I have my presentation will be about anywhere from 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes, and it's really for you guys to ask questions to the public in the process. But your plan is relatively simple and short in terms of the actual substance of the plan. I know it's a 150-page document here. Most of it's boilerplate language as well as a discussion on the demographics of the town, so don't actually impact the numbers or your compliance with the state laws. But to get to the sort of, as I said, your obligations under the law. So we had our third round plan we adopted, I think, in the spring of last year, fall of 2023, although I think losing dates in my head. At that time, we had an obligation of 527 units that we satisfied through the affordable housing overlay districts that were put in place not long after the plan was adopted by the board. We have I'll say prior round obligation, which is dating back to 1987 through 1999 of 166 units. That's also satisfied through that same zoning. Notice that's the prior round and the third round. Now we're into the fourth round, where DCA had calculated that Franklin had an obligation of 250 units. The town, we had adopted a resolution back in January claiming that our obligations would be, I believe, 212, maybe 214. The New Jersey Builders Association challenged that determination since we did straight a little bit from what DCA had calculated. And we had ultimately settled on 243 units of the town's third round obligation. So that's been set by order of the court. We have an obligation to meet a prospective need of new construction of 243 affordable housing units in the next 10 years. Another component of the obligation is known as the present need obligation or the rehabilitation obligation of 48 units. That's separate from the prospective need. The prospective need is essentially new construction of affordable housing to be deed restricted for 40 years for low and moderate income households. Rehabilitation obligation is homes that are existing in the township already that are likely occupied by a low or moderate income household. They're also likely code deficient in one way or another and therefore in need of rehabilitation. So based on census data, which is not necessarily the most accurate, but the only source we really have outside of somebody going out and doing a survey of every house in the town and also getting a statement of the income of every household in town that might be in those houses. How many are, like I said, occupied by a low or moderate income household and even some repairs. That's 48 units. And that is essentially going to be entirely satisfied by my estimation through just continuing participation in the Gloucester County Home Improvement Program. Historically speaking, Gloucester County's program, which is funded by CDBG money, Community Development Block Grants, rehabilitates anywhere from 5 to 10 houses in Franklin Township every year. Over the next 10 years, that's anywhere from 50 to 100 homes being rehabilitated just through continuing participation in that program, which I don't think even requires currently that we're providing any funding for that. It's entirely funded through CDBG, but that obligation should be entirely satisfied just with participation in the county's program, requiring the county to do nothing other than potentially provide some financial assistance to the county program through your affordable housing trust fund, not out of the general fund. That would be entirely satisfied. The prior round and third round obligations, as I said, those have been satisfied and approved by the court last year through the affordable housing overlay districts we put in place entirely with generally within the Franklinville and Malaga areas. There was about like 30 or 40 different properties we put in those overlay zones where inclusionary multifamily housing is permitted by right. That means if somebody wants to build, say, multifamily housing, for every 5 units they construct, one of them has to be deed restricted and affordable, and you can get credit for that. So put enough zoning in place at the time, enough properties that we will get more than the 400 something, 500, more than the 527 unit obligation. Since it's all overlay zoning, we wouldn't quite take full credit for everything in there. But through that zoning, we fully satisfied the prior round and third round. Now for the fourth round, we are proposing essentially just one site to cover the entirety of the fourth round obligation of the 243 units. And that is, and I'm sure you're all aware, we had the utility solar project that was proposed with the Keeper Farm. It went back and forth through the court for a while. First went to the zoning board for interpretation, and then went to the court, then came to this board. Got a preliminary site plan approval to cover the entire farm with the solar panels. And that's what's still going on in court, and court, multiple layers of the court, the appeal from the town was granted, and the zoning board essentially said to have jurisdiction over rather than the planning board, and the developer has since withdrawn the application essentially. So now that site, which we had previously taken that site out of consideration for potential affordable housing, allows some justification for reducing our obligation when we put forth the resolution of the town has an obligation of 215 or so rather than 253. Now that site is potentially available, you can't claim that it's not available for affordable housing, as well as the current zoning on that site already permits as one of the options under cluster development, essentially a residential hamlet cluster development that already requires affordable housing anyway. We can satisfy the entirety of our affordable housing obligation by making a few tweaks to the existing code within the business district where housing is already permitted by increasing the density just a little bit. If we're going from 6 units an acre to 8 or 10 units an acre there. So whether we The 10 units an acre, generally keeping the same zoning in place, and we fully satisfied that 243 unit obligation. And even with a little bit of extra, that goes up to approximately 250 affordable units to be constructed there. And that, in order to do that one site and one tweak to the existing code, we can fully satisfy our affordable housing obligation. But I do have to point out, in the last round, they've been quite technically qualified, but we more or less qualified for what's known as a durational adjustment, meaning that, and we're the same exact languages in this plan. We're fully acknowledging that there's no way all these affordable housing units are going to be built unless somehow public sewer is brought into the town. And what that requires is not an obligation on the township's part. The town does not have to do anything to bring sewer in. But if a developer wants to bring in sewer to a particular property to build affordable housing, the township really can't do anything to get in the way of blocking that. And that's what, as part of the settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center in the last round, I'm 100% certain that the courts, we're not negotiating with Fair Share Housing Center this time. It's going to the courts rather than a settlement negotiating with them. But I'm 100% certain the courts will require some similar provision, not the exact same language, that the town will agree that if a developer wants to build multifamily housing with an inclusionary set aside, and they're going to bring sewer in, whether that's from Vineland or from Layton, however they get it, then the town is essentially obligated to work with them in order to achieve that rather than trying to stop that. So, that being said, the durational adjustment is essentially that the courts, in the last conversation, I assume they'll do the same this round, acknowledge that more than likely the housing isn't going to necessarily be built in this round. The way the law is set up, it's supposed to be a realistic opportunity for construction within this 10-year time frame. And we can't really put a time frame on somebody extending sewer in Franklin. That could happen 2 years from now, it might not happen for the next 50 years. It all depends on economic conditions well beyond the township's control and the court's directive on that. It doesn't excuse you from the obligation, but it does essentially there's an acknowledgement that it's not necessarily going to be that anytime in the near future, and we know exactly when that will happen. So that being said, that's really the entirety of the plan here. Like I said, it's a 180 some odd page document, whatever it is. This was actually less than 100 pages. There's mostly boilerplate language explaining what affordable housing is and isn't, what the Fair Housing Act requires. There's 20 or 30 pages on the demographics of the town, which are nearly identical to the demographics of the town we put in the master plan re-exam that we adopted last year as well. I think some of the census data is updated to 2023, whereas we used to have 2022. Not a lot of changes in town between 2022 and 2023, as I'm sure you're all aware. And then there's some other languages discussing, pointing out that you already have an affordable housing ordinance on the books after the last round. You have a municipal housing liaison, an administrative agent, you have an affordable housing trust fund, there's a draft spending plan outlining what you're going to do with the money when it comes in, or if it comes in, and what you're required to do with that, which is essentially to provide support for affordable housing. And that's really it. We have a new obligation that we're starting the fourth round, and we're fully satisfying that obligation, in my opinion, to support the affordable agreement through minor tweaks to the existing zoning we have in the business district.
So, Chris, to summarize, the reason we're here tonight is you're presenting the new revised element to the planning board. This planning board, does it need to make a recommendation to the township committee to adopt?
This is the housing plan element, the fair share plan. Fair share plan comes out of the Fair Housing Act. Housing plan element is part of the land use law. So this is an element of the master plan, which is exclusively your jurisdiction to adopt. What the courts want to see, though, is that what the town adopts, when the planning board adopts the housing plan, they also are requesting that the governing body endorse the housing plan for resolution. So they don't, the committee would not be adopting this plan, but presumably at their next meeting, they will be endorsing the plan. So simply saying they're aware of the plan, they know the planning board adopted it, which hopefully you will do tonight because we have a deadline to do so.
So we need to put a motion in this evening if we wish to adopt this plan, and it needs to carry, and then we present it to the township committee,
Yes.
all before June 30.
Would be, well, the law doesn't specifically say that it's required that the committee endorse prior to June 30, but the expectation is that it will do so for most of the towns, and the attorneys
Okay.
working with, and I believe Jared has said this is all they want to include that in their submission to the court.
So from a professional standpoint, do you recommend that this board approve this plan?
Yes, you get in a little bit of trouble if you don't approve this plan, because, like I said, every town in New Jersey has a deadline of June 30th to have a plan submitted to the airport. The law technically requires 48 hours after adoption that it's submitted to the court. So the plan right now would be, presumably, we adopt this plan tonight. Sarah St. Angelo, the town's affordable housing attorney, would get our keeper, would submit it to the courts, and then when the town committee endorses the plan through a resolution, we would also submit that to supplement the resolution.
Should this board this evening not endorse this plan, what would the ramifications be?
Any town that is not compliant with the Fair Housing Act, in any shape or form, technically is potentially subject to a builder's remedy lawsuit, which means a developer can sue the town and say, point out that you're not currently compliant with the Fair Housing Act, and you're not in the process of gaining compliance. The way it's generally supposed to work is that once you submit and start the process, you're granted temporary immunity from those lawsuits, as the court goes through the plan and certify everything. So if you're not compliant with any portion of that by June 30th, a developer could sue you and try to force the development project that may or may not be in this plan.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, I guess open it up to the board for comment?
So on that same line there, so if we don't adopt this by June 30th, can any developer just file suit without even a plan to develop? Or does he have to have a plan to develop to sue?
You mean an application before this
Yeah.
board? They can file suit, the builder's remedy suit, and I'm not sure that they have to have a plan that's before this board is being accepted.
So
or
what's the
not.
basis of the suit then?
If they decide to get a parcel of land and they're going to put affordable housing on it, you can't stop them.
No, I know you can't stop them, but what I'm
The basis of the
asking,
lawsuit, I'm not sure if they have to have an application that's pending.
I don't know that they have to have an application pending or that they have to have had an application denied, like they're appealing something. My assumption would be that if a developer simply just sues and says he's not compliant, they send a 2-page letter in that says, I'm going to build affordable housing somewhere in town, I don't think that would get very far, but if somebody had a concrete plan, a concept plan ready to submit to show the courts, look, I'm going to build these 400 units and give them 80 affordable units on this exact property, here's my plan to extend sewer, and we haven't adopted the plan within the timeframe that's going through the court, they would have a good chance of winning that. But,
my question, that's kind of what I was looking for. Because I just want to make sure that somebody can't just file some frivolous lawsuit because you didn't adopt on time.
Anybody can file a lawsuit, we all know that.
Well, I bet it cost us money. I mean,
It costs you money, and the planners have gone through and give a very thoughtful presentation regarding how we can meet our affordable housing obligation consistent with the new fourth round legislation that was passed last year, and you've complied with all of the deadlines so far. So this has to be adopted so it can be submitted before the June 30th deadline to avoid, it gives you the immunity from the builder's remedy suit. Now no builder can come in and sue Franklin Township saying, you know, I have the right to affordable housing wherever I want because I've purchased this land. You're immune from those lawsuits. And this doesn't really expand upon the third round as much. The overlay is a little bigger. But other than that, you've designated where you can meet your obligation, which is what is required under the fourth round legislation. You need to identify how you're going to satisfy your respective obligations.
the requirements under the law in terms of, the state and the courts have set what the town's obligation is in terms of the numbers, which, like I said, a resolution was adopted by the committee in January. And then that was submitted to the program. Developers or any interested party had a full month, the entire month of February, to decide to challenge those numbers, which the New Jersey Builders Association did challenge. We settled with them at 243. That number was, the courts didn't approve that number until early March. So essentially, we're 3 months after when the numbers were assigned, including the time frame we've had to put this plan together. And frankly, even less than that, because the plan had to be done at least 10 days ago to make sure it was on file here at the office, in case anybody wanted to come look at it. Effectively, every town in New Jersey had about 2 months to put their fourth round housing plan together, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. The last round, I did about the same number of housing plans, but over about a 5-year span, before we had anywhere from 6 months to a year to get these plans together and work through the court process. This was every town had about 2 to 3 months to put their plan together after the numbers.
Planners are, this month, planners are those overwork professionals in any municipality who have reduced their own 5.4 pensions. I mean, the recommendation from the planner as well as legal is that you adopt a, you pass a resolution
Okay.
adopting the plan.
I will say, putting this plan together was a little bit easier than a lot of other towns that we had. One big piece of property in the northern end of town that is already zoned to permit relatively dense housing and already has a provision in that zoning district to require a set aside for affordable housing, and happens to be a big available piece of property within the sewer service area if somebody were to extend sewer, within the planning areas of the state plan that encourages development. Frankly, the only reason we didn't include that site to keep the farm in our last round plan was because there was a pending application for the solar there, so we figured we couldn't get back to the court saying that's going to be affordable housing site, but we knew there was already an application before the town for solar there.
Just to be clear, there is no longer a solar application on that parcel?
That's my understanding, that they have withdrawn the application or elected not to pursue further appeals of the last court decision. They could always come back and go to the zoning board and ask for a use.
Use variance, yes.
But they have not done so.
And this just has to be a realistic plan perspective.
It is.
Right.
It's workable.
They may come back, but at this moment in time, they're not seeking.
Okay. So this evening, we'll be opening up this for discussion. But before we go to open public, I would like to ask once again, are there any more comments from this board?
I just have one quick comment, and it's, related to the court's participation in this. From my understanding, Jackie can chime in, or Chris, multiple municipalities have submitted extension requests, and all of those requests have been denied by the courts. So,
Unilaterally denying every request for extension. Even a couple of towns I work in where their attorney recently got sick and they had to change attorneys about 3 weeks ago, that their request for extension that was denied.
yeah, so the courts essentially are not playing games with this like they were last time, allowing extensions for years at a time. It seems they want the situations resolved.
Third round started in 1999, and COA had put out some numbers, and they tried to establish a new methodology called the growth share. That ultimately got turned down by the courts, and then so they had multiple versions of numbers coming out, and then statewide court cases. This time it's just the one law was signed. Nobody challenged the law, or particulars of law. There was a group of towns from, I think mostly Bergen County, Passaic County, that challenged the Fair Housing Act sort of on its face. That didn't really go anywhere. So they're holding very firm on these deadlines to get plans adopted and submitted. What's going to happen once everything is submitted? At the same time, they're putting a lot of burden on themselves. The courts then, and anybody who wants to review these, they have 2 months to review, which is essentially going to be about 485 housing plans. Because they're getting all of these submitted at the same time.
Right. Thank you.
On page 24, you list out, you showed the 3 different options where these properties could be built. The first one being the Fry's Mill property that you just spoke about. But the, let's say though that the solar guys come back, they get approval, so then that piece is off the board. Did you look at are there any other locations that you looked at? Because these other 2 can't, they just kind of scratch the surface of what you need.
Well, yeah, there were 2 other parcels where somebody had approached, suggested they might want to do housing there. One is around Malibu Lake Boulevard, Oak Avenue, 9-acre property. That could get a little bit. Same thing with the other one on page 24, West Boulevard, about 3 acres. Those aren't necessarily feasible to get, even if we upzone considerably, to get anywhere near the density we need. So yes, that would, if the solar people come back and they get approval on that site with the zoning board, that would essentially throw a big wrench into this point.
Right.
So that would, put it this way, if this plan is approved and the zoning amended there and that becomes part of the housing plan, I think it would be very difficult for the solar group to come in and argue that they could get a use variance. It would be pretty contradictory to the master plan, since the element of the master plan saying this is going to be our affordable housing location. The zoning board would say, we really don't need that affordable housing, we're going to put solar.
But that's, yeah, because if that gets thrown out, then these other 2 locations you listed don't even address what's needed.
To be clear, those other 2 sites, we're not including those in the plan. If someone were proposing to change the zoning on those sites, we're required by law, whenever there's been any mention of somebody potentially wanting to build housing somewhere, to include that in the plan. I think the law specifically says anywhere where a developer has expressed an interest in developing that may include affordable housing, we're supposed to address whether or not we think those sites are suitable or feasible. In my opinion, at least the site at Malibu Lake Boulevard and Oak Avenue, you could do something there, maybe some denser single family, maybe some duplexes, things like that, and you can get a little bit more affordable housing there.
Would they still fall under like the same 10 houses per 10 houses per
No,
acre?
no, that, right now, we're not actually proposing to change the zoning on those sites. We're suggesting the point behind this is gives a little bit of flexibility that if the committee wanted to consider changing the zoning on those sites to up to density and to affordable housing, it would be part of the plan that they'd be able to do so, but we're not actually proposing to do that. We're acknowledging that there has been interest in building something there, but we're not saying that we're necessarily relying on those sites for any form of credits at this point.
Well, thank you, Chris, for a comprehensive report.
Before we open to the public, and I appreciate Chris's comments, and full transparency, 2 of those parcels that were proposed, I have an ownership interest in, which I was planning on abstaining from the vote on the master plan. So I just want to make that very clear that I do have an ownership interest in those. I did approach you and request that you consider those. So I don't want there to be any ambiguity, somebody thinking that they were stuck in there and that wasn't fully disclosed. So.
All right. Is there a motion to go into open public portion to speak only on the housing plan element?
Make a motion.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
I'm just gonna ask you to state your name.
I didn't give an
I am
answer.
going to swear you in.
Cindy Merckx, 330 Oak Avenue, Malaga, New Jersey.
Can you raise your right hand?
I will.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cindy, see if she can turn it now.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can
Yeah,
hear you.
oh, yeah.
Sure, they can-
Can you hear me in the back? Bill? Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. Since I live on Oak Avenue, and I have for 45 years and attended more meetings than I'd like to say, I'm glad that Mr. Ferrucci years ago stood up and said, we want to stay water and sewer, and he was challenged by the Greenways. It cost us to continue that fight, which we did, to bring those numbers down, that were going to increase our schools and what was country life to change. What I'm concerned about right now is that we didn't really do a good PowerPoint presentation to let the public know that maybe came out to look at it to see exactly where these would be. Jason, I'm glad you came forward to finally tell everybody that you do have an interest in that and that you've been on this board and the preliminary boards and that you failed to say that then when it probably should have been addressed because you were on the other part of these boards. Not that I'm saying you certainly have your choice and have every bit of your freedom to say that, but I do think it is a conflict when we chose people on the board that if that was on that we should have known that then and maybe put other people in that. That's all I'm saying regarding that. That bothers me. Okay, because it is in a neighborhood that right now the roads are bad, there's still flooding. Over the years I've had to come here because we didn't have enough drainage. Nobody wants, Jason's been here trying to produce a lot of building in our area. And every time the people have come out, and I'm not going to bring up, but I can, why don't we go back? You got 50 acres back there for $9,000. And it still is a big sore spot on a lot of the neighbors who live there. In addition, the woodland management back there, they ripped out everybody behind all their homes. Now they're faced with all types of bugs and insects that they left all the stuff there. So it's
Cindy,
been one
with all
mess
due
after-
respect,
it's been one mess after
what does this
another.
have anything to do with the housing plan?
You can direct your comments to the affordable housing.
I will. Well, it is, because it is in my neighborhood.
No, it's not.
When you're thinking of my
You understand
neighborhood,
that These are, the 3 properties listed here are the properties that developers have approached. They're not part of, the plan is for the key purpose, and that's what the planner suggested. The affordable housing
Correct.
element will be satisfied by the key purpose.
one of them, that's one of the areas, but there also are areas in Malaga, correct?
There's the two that Jason had.
Correct.
emailed myself and that, and say you've got interest in these properties.
What about the DiMatteo farm? What about Grub Road? What about that area? That was on your plan before in Malaga.
Yeah, those are still, everything from the prior round, where we've already done the affordable housing overlays, those are staying as is. We're not proposing to change those.
So they can still come in and put in all that if they wanted to, forget that farm with the solar, and still come into downtown
They would need
Malaga.
that farm with the solar too to meet the obligation.
So they would.
Absolutely.
It's the prior round obligation.
But the problem, again, is water and sewer.
Listen, I'm not arguing that.
No,
that
that's why
point. I'm
Mayor
just
Ferrucci years
correcting you
ago,
on
and
what you
not that
said.
I'm telling you, but this was your own party. And the people didn't want it to change. And they were willing to say, we're gonna fight it. Jackie, you're a great lawyer. You've stood against many of them. I have every bit of confidence that you'd go in there and you would still fight for Franklin Township if this board told you to go do it. There's not a doubt in my mind that any lawyer would take it to say it's not fair. We still want to stay water and sewer. You want to be like Silvergate? Look what happened. Those people, I gotta go to a meeting tomorrow night because of the amount of building that's going on. And they'll just connect to everybody. Once they connect to the next one, and it goes against your property. I don't want to see it. I'm just one person. I've been asked by many people to still stand up here, so I do. I've been an advocate for 45 years to keep it water and sewer.
I don't think there's a person sitting here that disagrees
I know.
with you. This is just what the
I
state
know.
of New Jersey has.
But
come
don't
to.
be afraid of them, is what I'm saying. If you have to be the one to
Listen,
say
I'm
no,
not- I'm not afraid of it.
you know, there's
It's not
lawyers.
Yeah.
fair or not.
These guys are always
The
so.
state has put this on a rock and dock. It's 17
But we don't like the state.
They lost the injunctive relief that they sought last week, and the town had so much
That's all right, I got a door.
exposure. Exposure if you don't adopt it according to the letter.
What's she
Thank you.
saying?
I have to do it. She's not- Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else from the public?
Over the last 45 years, virtually all of them have
Same routine. My name is Kelly Zoppel, Kelly, I'm 45 Tatum Road, Franklinville. And, raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Okay, so mine is mainly questions directly to you. I wrote this while you were giving your presentation. Are we going to need our own Franklin Township MUA to have in place for a developer who may want to put sewer lines in?
There's no obligation to that. The assumption, or at least the conversations we had with the courts and Fair Share Housing Center the last time, was the assumption would be if any public sewer were to be brought into Franklin, it would be an extension from either from Vineland or from Clayton, most likely. There's been no requirement for the township to establish.
Okay, that's good to hear that. How would well and septic work for 10 units per acre? Just out of curiosity. I know in places
Generally,
like lifestyles
would
and
not-
building, like
I don't know
they,
about well, the septic would not work very well for 10 units an acre unless there's advanced.
well, that's what I'm thinking, it's like they have to be like a big package deal like they do in the one that comes to mind, my husband's a surveyor, I should really answer that, I should say. They have like package units for these ones, so I was just curious if you knew how that was going to work with 10 units per acre with well and septic and distances between homes and all that. It would have to be something that really needs to be addressed, and something a little further.
The current regulations, if that's the assumption is, if anything is going to be built anywhere near the density proposed, it would have to be connected to the public sewer.
Okay, my next one is, you were talking about the houses that already exist. Now, we don't have a rental registry here in our town that we're aware of. Would getting a rental registry in place help with the affordable housing, bringing that down some if we put one in place?
Would it change it?
We have one.
Chris,
How,
don't we have
can you
one?
explain that a little more? 'Cause I'm-
We have a rental.
We have
a
one.
rental.
You do?
Yes.
That's news to me, because I have people across the street who've never been on any registry.
If they don't register, it's kind of hard.
The rehabilitation obligations for existing homes, and Gloucester County, anybody who lives in Franklin, if you, I believe the county program might be limited to owner occupied housing. But if you live in town and you qualify as low or moderate income, you can apply to Gloucester County for home repairs to a major system, which includes roofing, HVAC, siding, windows, doors, ADA accessories.
But that's only taking into account the ones who apply.
Yes.
Okay.
You have to apply for it, they don't come out and ask.
Right, okay, so that's only taking, so are we encouraging people to basically apply for these things, and that would?
The program's been, Gloucester County's been running the program for close to 20 years, I believe, it's already there.
Okay, I don't know that many people know about that, to be honest with you, because other people And that might put more houses into this to bring our numbers down a little bit
It
more.
wouldn't change the numbers, it's a separate obligation, we have obligation. If the county, let's say the county hypothetically rehabilitates 1,000 units in the Franklin for the next 10 years, then it doesn't change the other obligation, the rehab is just the present need for repairs. The prospective need obligation is all that new construction, which you can accomplish through essentially only one of two ways. You can have somebody build new homes and leave restricting those affordable units, or you can have the town buy existing market rate homes and then sell them at a cheaper price as affordable units. You can go buy a house, the township funds at $350,000, $400,000 and resell it for
I think,
$150,000.
yeah, I think the
Yeah, one
confusing
credit
part
would
is
have
that.
to lose $250,000.
Yeah, exactly, that's not.
We did get credits a few years ago.
There were, the prior round obligations did allow for, they call it prior cycle credits and credits without control. They're very limited to homes built between 1980 and 1986. We have to demonstrate that those homes were occupied by a low and moderate income household for at least 20 to 30 years, and that the current value of the home also still is at a price that will resold to be available to the home. The initial estimate was there were several hundred homes that fit that category. For the first round of compliance, we did do surveys to try and get for the credits we could for that. I think we ended up on about 49
Yep.
credits that we could claim.
What is the income base that they need to require, or does that go by household size?
It's determined by household size. There's I think I have it in here.
So if somebody who bought the house in 1980 had a household of, say, 6 people, and now they're only a household of 2 or 3, that makes that income requirement go
Town.
different.
Well, the way it works, I think we had to estimate a household size of 3 for all of these. We didn't
Right.
individually calculate every single one of those. Right, we've already gotten all the credits for that mechanism, unless somebody can get better information. My recollection is letters were sent out to 500 or 600 homes that would potentially qualify, and only about 15 to 20% were returned to simply one-page survey.
Anybody else from the public wish to speak on housing? Seeing none, is there a motion to close open public portion?
Make a motion to close.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the board, again, one last discussion before we vote to make a recommendation to comply or vote not to comply.
The motion would be to adopt the housing plan.
Okay.
We have a resolution.
Yeah, it's a resolution. Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Motion to pass the resolution adopting the plan.
Motion to adopt, to pass the resolution of the plan.
Yeah, what she said.
It'll be right in the minutes.
I make a
Thank you.
motion what Jackie said.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a second? Seeing none, I make the second. Saved you, John.
All right, perfect.
Okay,
I'm going to recuse myself for previously stated reasons.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Malady?
Yes.
Mr. Sweet?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
Can I abstain, Jackie, since I have to? Got nothing?
we have 5 without.
Yeah, you can.
Abstain.
Yes. Motion carries. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a couple of ordinances that were up for the Township Committee to review at the last Township Committee meeting. And the first one on our docket this evening is 0525, Land Use, Chapter 253, Accessory Structures. The reason we are here is one of the Township Committeemen didn't quite understand the language, and he was complaining about height restrictions, didn't quite understand it. Since that moment, he asked for a postponement. He asked to kick it back to the planning board. He is now aware of what the height restriction means. He misinterpreted it. Mr. Planner, any comments on 0525?
I was not at the committee meeting when this was introduced or discussed. Well, we have the ordinance, 05 is one about the accessory structures we're talking about, and we have the two different charts. This is verbatim the language that we use in the master plan rating table report about, based on the size of your property, that sort of dictates how big of an accessory structure you're allowed to have, and based on the size of the structure, there's increased setbacks required, and essentially the further setback you are, the bigger structure, there's increased height. My understanding from what the township manager had explained to me, and he called me a few weeks ago saying, or end of last week saying, have they tabled this one, we don't want you to discuss it with the planning board. There are some questions about, how we calculated these specific numbers of the height. And, my recollection of this board and the subcommittee we had last year was, it wasn't a super scientific calculation. It was just use these sizes and then said, 5 feet, 7 feet, 10, 12, 15, 20 of setbacks, and 12, 15, 15, 20, 20, 25. I don't necessarily have a strong feeling any one way or another about these exact numbers. And if it's this board or the township committee's strong feelings that they want these adjusted up or down in any direction,
I'm
okay with that.
shed a little bit of light. We started with the baseline of what is currently permitted within the township. Currently, you're allowed on, regardless of your lot size, the way the ordinance is written is that the maximum permitted accessory structure would be 1,200 square feet, and I believe it's a height of 15 feet. So we started at the base, and we increased from there due to the fact that we have multiple applications over the years to the zoning board for larger structures on larger properties. So that's where the numbers came from. But there was no increase to what I would call the base height and the base building size, in addition to what's currently the ordinance.
Changing the definition where it no longer says maximum of 2 cars, I think it was 2 cars or 3 cars.
3 cars.
We struck that.
Correct.
We struck that out, so we're not regulating how many cars you're allowed to have in your garage.
Right, for clarity purposes, because that was confusing, so.
But yeah, the point being, it's not like I sat down and did an analysis of every application for the town or through height diagrams showing you the impact of every single accessory structure. They're just nice round numbers, essentially, increasing in height and size as you get further away from the property and as you have a bigger property and things like that.
According to the zoning board, the number one reason for a variance in this township is for a larger accessory structure. And the intent of the master plan revisit team was to lessen the burden on the township residents to make it easier. Therefore, this ordinance. The question was, that particular night at our last township committee meeting, was the height restriction. The particular township committeeman did not understand what mean height is. He confused it with overall height. Just so people know, the overall height of the building, if it's an A roof, would be the top of the peak. That's not the answer. Our 15-foot for smaller structures is halfway from the height of the building usable space, halfway to the peak. And they call that mean height. It's a whole new terminology for many people. So when you see the height of the building at 15 foot, it could be 17, 18 feet, 20 feet even, based on your pitch of your roof.
So, Ralph, you had said that the committeeman didn't understand at first, but now he does understand?
I believe Mr.
So-
Brand explained it to him.
Okay, so then this isn't, there should be nothing, there should be no issue done with this.
It should not be, but we were
Perhaps
tasked this
we
evening to
can
discuss it.
we can offer some clarity as to the height calculation.
It says maximum permitted height.
Right.
And maximum mean.
Right, you should say mean.
Exactly.
Well,
The
no.
building height says if you have a flat roof, you get measured to the roof itself, peak of the roof essentially, which is where the flat roof is. If you have a gambrel roof where essentially there's 5 linkages, it's essentially the middle linkage, which is also basically the mean height on most gambrel roofs. If you have a pitched roof, which most accessory structures, the shed is going to be, you got, we also have the A, gable or hip roof, usually measured to the middle of the roof. So for these 25-foot maximum height and a 3,000 square foot structure, that could be the peak of the roof, could be at 30, 32 feet. Give or take, depending on the.
I think
So based on the nomenclature, we don't need to put the word mean into the.
No, that's already the definition of building height, for your definition.
I've
Okay.
in the course of my career, I've reviewed many ordinances, and I think the most appropriate thing to do here for clarity is you can simply put an asterisk next to where it says maximum permitted height. See note 1, put note 1 underneath with the definition of height. So anyone reading the chart can see what the definition of height is rather than having to go back, to the definition section of the ordinance. I've seen it done many times on charts like this. And I think that provides some clarity.
So would you have three definitions then for flat roof?
No, that's already incorporated into the current definition. So
It literally just says.
that's the purpose of the definition to begin with.
Height, it just says for, shall be measured from the average grade around the finished floor elevation to the peak of a flat roof, the midpoint of a gable roof, or the mean elevation of a pitch roof.
So, Mr. Brandt,
Reference that or copy of that one.
so Mr. Brandt would like to add that footnote. Should that be in the form of a motion and carried for the recommendation for the change to the ordinance? Or can we just tell the township committee to add it?
I think you should do it by motion.
Okay.
You can send the recommendations back.
All right, Mr. Brandt, can you please restate what you stated, and that would be your motion?
Sure. I'd make a motion to amend the current accessory structure setback and height requirement chart, adding a note below the chart referencing maximum permitted height, and include the current definition, which is currently in Chapter 253, as it pertains to building height.
All right, we've all heard that. Before we ask for a second, at this point, is there a motion to go into open public portion on 0525?
So moved.
Hey, Bill, I want to ask Chris one question.
Sure.
Chris, so you've read this, right? Yeah, so all of the language that's struck here is consistent with our initial recommendation, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's pretty much verbatim what he said there.
All right. Okay. All right, I'm just going to make sure that we're not striking anything
Most of
else.
the strikes was about 3 quarters.
Yeah, I just, I just
So-
want to make sure we're not striking anything else out.
There's a motion to go into open public. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward.
Swear in again? No. Okay. Ellie Blanco, 45 Tatum Road, East Wayne, Pennsylvania. Yes. Okay, so again, it's mostly questions for you, because you weren't there, so I got up and asked. So we have a lot of smaller lots in here. I feel like this was mainly directed at the ones that are in there. So you've got your, I could show you listings in like, by Iona Lake or Franklin Lake that are, they're 10,000 square foot properties. There's nothing listed for like how far you have to be back from your septic, from your neighbor's septic, and everything at the back of the property isn't always feasible for some of these weird shaped lots that have them because, the backyard of every corner property is somebody's side yard. So I think it's kind of there, and it's not just, one property or another. There's several, any corner property is going to have that issue, that the back of their property is the side yard of somebody else's. And you're also, again, I want to know how, like, there's nothing listed that you have to be so many feet away from your septic or your well and all that.
County health. That's already.
But people looking at that are going to say, well, I can build a 12,000 square foot, even though they only have a house that's maybe 700, 800 square feet. They could build a 1,200 square foot brick structure. So- Exactly, and it is, and I feel like that, then you got, two people living on a 10,000 square foot property, and you're like, wait a minute, there's gotta be some sort of, I think,
Well, accessory structure is in the second house. It's never shed.
yeah, but you know as well as I, people live in it, so,
not supposed to.
I know they're not supposed to, but people do. I know people in my area that are living in trailers that are pulled in the next, to people's house, RVs and campers and all that, so,
Not supposed to.
I know they're not supposed to be, but we also know it
Really
exists.
not part of this.
Right, we also know it exists, so my concern is, I feel like I think there just needs to be a little bit more for the smaller lot properties in here, or some sort of, I don't think it's complete. I feel like it's a little bit incomplete for because there is a big, all through the village sections, you go from Franklin Lake, all the way, basically everywhere where the wastewater management overlay goes for eventual water and sewer. And that was my concern, was that, is this a precursor to going into water and sewer? Which, yeah, I know everybody says that they're not, but the overlays are all there, where these smaller lots all are, all the way from Franklin Lake through Iona and down into Malaga.
So let me take a stab at answering. So we have our setbacks of 15 feet. We have our maximum size in these small lots of 1,200 square foot.
Mhm.
The applicant that wanted to build this building would have to go to the zoning office first to see if it complies.
Okay.
And then we have other ordinances in place. If you disturb greater than 500 square feet, we have stormwater management things in place. And all these things are safeguards, I believe, to protect the neighbors.
Okay,
By
but
the time you
again,
take a 10,000 square foot lot, take the square footage of the house off, the square footage of the driveway, the square footage of the setbacks on all four sides. Septic,
Septic.
your well, by the time you take all that and subtract that from 10,000 square feet, what are you really left with? I mean,
but
one
people,
in a
but see,
thousand.
this is where I think the verbiage and the language isn't clear. Somebody's gonna say, well, it's within the code, and they're just gonna build it without going through a variance. Or going through a board.
That's the point, to stop people from having to get a variance.
I thought it was the opposite. I
That
thought
was
you
the
guys were
biggest
saying
complaint we've
that
had
you
over-
don't want them to go through the zoning board and everything.
We don't want them to go to the zoning board to spend money unnecessarily, that's correct.
Right, that's what, but I think that they actually need to, because there's different lots. I think
Well, I
that
think
that
there's
is
a
the
lot of people
safeguard.
in town that curse me
I
out
know they
every
won't
day.
like me, but you know what?
Because of it.
My neighbors all call me a Karen anyway, but you know what? That's because I care.
More than
So-
likely, somebody has a quarter acre lot, roughly 10,000 square feet, and if they wanted to put up the maximum 1,200 square foot sign, they're probably gonna be triggering a variance one way or another somewhere, between the setbacks, between the building coverage requirements, between what the, if they have an existing septic field, I know the requirement is running on.
Well, most of that's another issue, is that there's one that, my septic doesn't have a field. I have a chamber system. I have a deed restriction on my property because I basically have a sewer bill because I have to get the county to come every year and agree to my septic. And these are the systems that they're making people put in on these undersized lots. So I think, there's too many gray areas, I think, to put everything into one without things going through.
Nothing in this ordinance, nothing in the town code supersedes any septic regulations.
She did.
By the state.
20 seconds.
So those are all different places. And now, if somebody willingly violates one of those codes, that's something to enforce. Certainly.
But there's no teeth in them. It's a medial
I
fine.
do know there are teeth in the septic that are allowed to withdraw.
Well, they can put a lien against your house if you don't pay, because I fall under that if I don't pay every year.
If you
So.
put a structure of nothing in the septic field, the town and or county can go out and enforce you to remove that structure.
Okay, well, I'm fine.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public that wishes to speak on 0525? Is there a motion to close open public portion on 0525?
I make a motion to close.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay.
So do you need me to repeat my motion, or, yeah? Yeah, we have a motion on the floor, seconded by Mr. Sweet.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so now we need to vote, and then we would make a recommendation to the Township Committee to adopt 0525. We did that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could do a roll call, Chrissy, on the...
Roll call.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Sure. No, I'm not abstaining from this. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Malady?
Yes.
Mr. Sweet?
Yes.
Mayor Bruno?
Abstain.
Mr. Cavalier?
Yes. Okay, motion carries to recommend to the Township Committee 0525. Next on tonight's docket, again for the ordinances for the master plan, 0725 RA to highway commercial and interchange commercial. Chris, any comments from our planner?
This one is relatively straightforward. This was the recommendation from the master plan to take essentially the entirety of Harding Highway and Nelson Drive frontages and zone them back to, or zone them to commercial. There was a handful of parcels that were in the RA zone or in the RA zone with a couple of them in maybe, what was the other one? I think it was all RA zone. Put them in the highway commercial zone or the interstate commercial zone. So we have uniform commercial zoning across the frontage, as well as to acknowledge the existing non-conforming homes in a few areas, not these parts of the zone, but other areas. Obviously, there's houses on houses on Dustin Drive that currently are non-conforming uses. As we're amending the zones to reflect that they would be permitted uses if they are existing, so they're not treated as a non-conforming use anymore. And if they wanted to expand on their house, and someone build a new bedroom, build a new kitchen, build a deck, they're permitted to do so as a regular resident rather than having to go to the zoning board for expansion of the non-conforming use area. So it makes it easier for somebody who lives there to expand on their property if they wish.
Currently, they would have to go in front of the zoning board and request of use variance.
In a non-conforming house in the HC district, you have to go to the zoning board if you want to expand your house.
So this plan change would eliminate that.
That would make them conforming uses. Now, the issue that's been brought to my attention, that I don't have any problem with this, is that right now your buffering requirements in the code, I think it's 253, 103, or 104 maybe, I may be off by a number or two there, requires buffering between non-residential uses and residential districts, but not residential uses. Although it expressly says non-conforming residences get a buffer, but now we'd be making them conforming uses. Technically, the buffering requirement wouldn't apply to those existing homes. So my suggestion is, I don't know if that gets done in this ordinance itself or a separate ordinance, an amendment to the buffering requirements to change it from residential district to residential use, so that it's clear that wherever there's a new industrial or commercial facility going in the highway commercial district, in the irrigation commercial district, if they're adjacent to a residential use, they gotta provide a buffer.
So we need to be clear in our ordinance.
Yeah, right now your ordinance, as it's written, could be interpreted that if somebody brought in an application in the highway commercial district, let's say build a gas station, and they have a residence next door to them, they wouldn't be required to put a buffer in because that residence wouldn't be a non-conforming residence, it would be a conforming residence now. So we just want to change the language to say residential, any residential use in those districts, you have to put the buffer on the commercial property.
So it's simply the removal of one word.
Changing
Right.
residential district to use, a couple of the little changes to make it clear, but basically.
Right. Okay.
So,
That hasn't been introduced, I was going to be drafting that up so it's ready, in case the committee wants to act on that.
So, Chris, we spent a lot of time, in the master plan advisory committee, we spent a lot of time on revising buffers and increasing them in certain areas. Just want to make sure that whatever change you're proposing here, that those increased buffers would apply to these residential areas in this zone.
In the master plan, we didn't specify exact distances of increased buffers, it just said we need to enforce and enhance the buffer requirements between non-residential and residential. This ordinance doesn't change anything in the buffer requirements, that's not being addressed by this ordinance. This is simply the rezoning and then recognizing the existing non-conforming uses. But it was pointed out by Barbara that the current code, the wording in the buffer requirements is a little bit weird. We should update that. And I agree with that. Okay. So that's not being addressed by this ordinance, but I think that can easily be addressed through another ordinance.
you haven't written that draft yet on the revised ordinance language.
Oh, I have personally drafted it, but it has not been sent to the township for them to consider.
Okay.
Yet. So, township committee, Matt Finley, they have not seen it yet, but I have personally drafted it because it's a relatively simple change.
Thank you. Any more comments from the board before we go into open public portion on this?
Well, just to clarify, so to bifurcate these two issues, we're not really discussing the buffers as it relates to this ordinance. And this ordinance actually expands individuals' property rights by allowing them to expand upon their, this ordinance doesn't change the zoning on these parcels only. It also extends those protections to everyone in the highway commercial zone that has a pre-existing residential use in order to expand their use. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
But how did
To
the,
make a referral of the buffer ordinance.
Well, it would have to be, I'd send it to Matt Finley, and he could then bring it to the township committee's attention, and if they want to, they can introduce it, whether it's in that form or they want to discuss it further. Is up to them.
But the intent of this, the master plan committee, this board, and I don't want to speak for the township committee, there was never any intent to reduce buffers or eliminate buffers. That was not the intention. There simply is a language change that's going to need to happen.
It was an oversight that we didn't review the actual actual buffer language specifically.
Right.
Plan to say, oh, we're changing this. So I think the current language we put in place to recognize the existing non-conforming uses. So it said non-conforming uses, but I probably should have just said if you're adjacent to a residential use.
Right, okay, thank you.
But the concern that exists, though, with these increased buffers is that if this ordinance gets changed, the way it's written to be changed, those new buffers don't apply because they haven't been adopted. Is that correct?
Well, the current buffer requirement, which says for, I believe, in certain districts, it's 50 feet to 150 feet. It doesn't specify which. I guess it leaves it up to the planning board's discretion to some degree, which I have a little bit of an issue with there. It is required when you're adjacent to a residential district or adjacent to a non-conforming residential use. And other districts, I believe maybe when you change commercial, let's say 150 or maybe 100 to 300 foot buffer when you're adjacent to a residential district or non-conforming residential use. The real issue is those current non-conforming uses will become conforming, and therefore, by a technicality, the buffer requirement currently in place wouldn't apply to a conforming residential use if it's in the highway commercial district. It's not a residential district, and it's not a non-conforming use. So the cleaning up of the code would then say your buffer requirements as they currently stand, which is anywhere from 100 or anywhere from 50 or 300 feet, would apply to residential uses rather than to take up that non-conforming use part that would the muddy water.
You good with that? Yeah.
Just to be clear, that ordinance, anything changing the buffers themselves, that has not been introduced by council. That's not something that has been referred to you, so there isn't any actual ordinance. We can have, I think we can have a discussion of what you might want to see ultimately in the ordinance, and we did discuss that in the master plan, but there's no actual ordinance to refer back to the council or the committee at this point for them to be, they haven't introduced it.
All we're addressing is pre-existing conditions.
The one that the committee specifically requested you review again in the 07.
07.
Which is the rezoning of the properties as recommended by the master plan and the recognizing of the existing residences in the highway commercial district as permitted uses. Which is completely consistent with the master plan. Exactly what it said. The issue is with the oversight about the buffer language, which in my opinion is not going to be very easily addressed through a separate ordinance.
Okay, make a motion to open to the public.
Ultimately, assuming the committee does want to act on that prudential ordinance in some fashion or another, that would eventually come back to this board because of the ordinance change. So they'd have to introduce it and come to you for consistency review of the master plan and then go back to the council committee for a second reading and adoption. So ultimately, anything that would change the buffer, whether we increase it or just change that language, would come back to this board again.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second on Jason's motion?
I'll second going to public.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, open public portion is now for anything or anyone to speak about 0725.
State your full name.
Barbara Halpern, 2446 Harding Highway, Newfield, New Jersey.
Ms. Halpern needs to have the testimony about the
I do. Okay, I basically want to clarify it. I don't see the rush to change our homes on Harding Highway from non-permitted to permitted without covering us with a buffer. Because it's more important, as someone who lives in this district and someone who's spoken to many people in the district, that we have a buffer. Applications are time of submission. It could take months before you give us a buffer. If you recommend passing this as it is, you strip us of buffers, and many people are then vulnerable. There are hundreds of homes in the H2 zone that will be left vulnerable. So what's the hurry? Can't you just recommend that either you strike Section 1 from this and revisit it when you make the buffer ordinance, or you just wait to do this until you have the buffer ordinance so you can pass it at the same time and not leave us disenfranchised, because we pay as much taxes as you do based on the square footage of our homes. It's based on the acreage of our land. So why should we be treated as second-class citizens? I was zoned RA when I bought my house. It was changed through a master plan, just like you're doing to these other people who are RA. You're going to dump them into a zone with no buffer. RA has the best buffer. 150 down to 50. And then, like you said, in the IC zone, it's 100 to 300. Now, as non-conforming, I had asked, when I found out that I was dumped into the highway commercial zone from being residential, I asked Mayor Ferrucci for a buffer, and he gave it to us. May not be as good as the RA, but we have something. At least let us keep what we have now until you give us a replacement by fixing the language. Just from one word could fix this. One word. So how hard is it for you to wait a little bit, recommend waiting, and then get it all at once, so you're not causing distress to hundreds of homeowners? Keep in mind, these homeowners are voters too. So please consider that rather than rush into something that leaves us vulnerable. Like I said, time of application is what matters. You could change this a month, 2 months from now, but if someone zooms in there with an application, that homeowner has no options. So please don't do this to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take a full name, please.
Yes, Rachel has stepped on 47 Cheyenne, Franklin, New Jersey.
Okay, raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth?
I do. Good evening, my name is Rachel Hess. I live at 47 Shea Ave, a resident next to a property that will be impacted by Ordinance 725, rezoning certain areas from residential to agricultural, residential agricultural to highway commercial. I'm here tonight as both a mother and a farmer to express serious concern over the continuation of Ordinance 725 and the proposal to rezone areas that have long been designated residential agricultural. It's deeply troubling to see an attempt to rework zoning laws in a way that would clearly benefit particular businesses prohibited in the RA zone unless a use variance is granted. Not only does this circumvent the proper process, but it sets a dangerous precedent of bending rules to accommodate commercial developers at the expense of residents, farmers, and our township's long-term vision. I urge the board not to ignore the spirit of the master plan, which emphasizes protecting rural character and preserving agricultural lands. I oppose Ordinance 725 and any attempt to rezone farmland for commercial use. The process should protect families, farmland, and our community's integrity, not accommodate prohibited developments through backdoor zoning. Hundreds of residents have signed petitions and attended meetings clearly opposing this development. Our voices matter. If the board rezones this land, what stops future commercial applicants from doing the same? With that, I have some additional questions for you. How is the Ordinance 725 consistent with our master plan's call to preserve agricultural land and the township's rural identity?
So this is a direct recommendation from the master plan. Parcel by parcel, this was recommended in the master plan. Alternatives or highway adjustment.
So for properties such as ours, which has been residential agricultural for over 50 years, in our
The RA district in the existence of
okay, and they stand corrected.
Chris, I just want to add that, again, we spent a lot of time in that master plan review, and we're willing to change that zoning for those areas to keep commercial development on the commercial, where it's appropriate, along the major highways.
Right.
But, again, I want to go back to the buffers. We also spent a lot of time on increasing buffers for the very reason that you're concerned about, and that's the residents that are already on these major highways. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Does this ordinance open the door for future commercial developments to request zoning changes on any residential agricultural parcel?
Any development, if they want to request a zoning change, they can approach the committee and make a request. This potentially opens the door for those properties that are currently not zoned to operate, including the commercial development being allowed on those particular properties. I don't see any need to expand beyond the property. The point of this is to have commercial development consistent with commercial facility across the highway corridor. By facility part of the area already for the use anywhere now, the existing homes are also being recognized as being no one getting kicked out, but if they want to sell, if a farmer wants to sell to a commercial developer and they have frontage on the highway, they're going to build them.
Chris, I have a question. I'm sorry. How many properties were
It's
affected?
not a lot, I want to say,
20? Some of them are township-owned properties that were like 55, correct?
'29 properties. I don't have the total acreage of them in front of me, but there's 29 properties. I think the biggest one of them was a township-owned property, that maybe it's actually school board property.
That was on the corner there.
Yeah.
Will the specific properties be mentioned at the next zoning board meeting?
They should be with the paperwork.
They're listed in the ordinance, yeah.
Well, the zoning board, no, the zoning board does not deal with rezoning, they only hear applications for variances. So none of this has been discussed at the zoning board. I don't know what happens with the zoning board, I'm not there. But the zoning board's jurisdiction is just to hear applications for variances. They don't have anything to do with master plan or with that. Aside from they do reports to the planning board and the governing body and saying, here's what we're going to variances and then we'll change it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And back to Barbara, like, I can envision that these two, the ordinance she's talking about having to be amended, and this ordinance will probably be in front of the township committee at the same time. Could probably make that happen, right?
We can make that happen, like I said, I've already got an ordinance drafted, ready to go. I can make some tweaks to it if we have some discussion.
Because this would have to be reintroduced anyway, correct?
Yes,
Possibly, I don't know.
it's new language.
Introduced and now within the next, before it's going to be listed for public hearing. Oh, no, you have public hearing, right?
Yeah, but didn't we just amend it a little bit or not?
No.
Well, it depends if we haven't made any changes yet, yeah.
We made one minor change to 05, but nothing to 07.
But we can,
Yet.
I don't, the barber's one, I don't know if there's any.
Buffers in there.
Yes, I'm not aware of any pending development applications that we want to stop or that we want to push through. So
Can we
just
add the buffers and as
just to
part
add
of
a
this?
point to what she said, like,
Can we,
should be done.
I have no issues with changing the zoning, but it was done with the understanding that the buffers were gonna get made part of it.
Right.
So can we amend this and then include these
We don't have to.
recommend?
We can
another ordinance,
introduce,
it's a different
we can-
ordinance.
Well, then we should
And
table
the
this.
ordinance that he's drafted regarding
You don't-
buffers to that
The mayor has
point, and
recommended
they
that
can be
already.
presented at the same
Table?
time.
Yeah,
This,
he's recommended it.
No, I don't-
This has already been introduced and
The township
is it
committee.
tabled?
Yeah.
Those tables.
So then it can be scheduled after the first reading of
Right,
the
and I
other
say
ordinance. and they can
we'll
be scheduled
schedule
at the
both
same
at the same time.
order. Yeah,
He can get that stuff to Matt
Yeah.
tomorrow,
and
and
that could be your recommendation back to the township committee that
these guys can kick back to the
it's
township
tabled
what
until
they,
such time
what
that
they
the
already
law has been
wanted
introduced.
in the master plan, and
Yeah.
just pick
Ju-
up from there.
Just for,
That way they'll be adopted at the same meeting.
just for clarity purposes, Chris, the changes to the buffer ordinance are language changes, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
That you're-
open
right.
to whatever the master plan just said, enhance, we didn't specifically say change it from 50 to 75 or from 100.
Right, so you don't have any specifics, right, on that, so the ordinance change would be specifically to remove one or two words
Language where it says non-conforming use or district
more clarity.
where you're adjacent to residential use.
Right.
I want to have a discussion with the committee, but yes, the master plan does recommend removing farm fences, so that can be included in the town law.
The board has to discuss it to see what they would be doing
That's what the master plan says, yes.
All right, we're still in open public
Anyone else from the
portion.
public? Yeah, wish.
One more time?
Cindy Merckx, 330 Oak Avenue, Malaga. I do, thank you. I have a question on this because I'm looking at section 2, where it says the highway commercial zoning district, and that particular part down at the bottom there where it goes those boundary tolerance, see below, okay? And that says shall not apply to the proposed new zone boundary line. And then we go through some lot and blocks there. What I want to know is, these are all presently zoned RA, and I believe Mr. Fazio, who bought it, became a farmer, and it was all made into farmland. Am I correct, Mr. Travelers?
Yeah, previous to his ownership, it was in a woodland management plan.
Right, I know that part, but now it's still listed as RA. These properties are not, are they highway commercial or RA?
these properties, I believe, are on the south side of Route 40, between, let's say, Malaga and Route 55. There's a couple small, very small parcels that have homes on them. I think HT Communications, there's a
Is
tower
one.
there.
Yeah,
is
And
one
we
of them.
own one
So-
ourselves, the
Four that are
town.
owned by according to the thing, it says Basland Fort. So he has several of the homes there. That's what I want to know. In other words, that's RA, and he's farming it and getting farmland assessment. What would he be changed to? Interchange? Is that what they're going to go?
There, yeah, the proposal is to
Yes.
change that strip to interchange commercial.
So it's
Right.
to go to interchange, am I correct?
Correct.
To
Correct.
go from that.
Yes.
Does he lose his farmland stuff?
No, because several
He can
years
still get
ago,
farmland.
the right to farm ordinance was carried across all zones, that farming is a permitted use in all zones. Therefore, farming is permitted in the IC zone.
So in the IC zone right now, presently, you're not allowed to put warehousing, correct? Or does that change because of one of your recommendations, page 41? Number 9.
Master plan now?
Now, I'm on the master plan
Yeah.
reexamination report that this board was looking at. Township should consider permitting large warehouses and distribution center facilities. Says so right there on page 41, number 9.
I recall.
41.
But does that change that now, so he could put a warehouse on that?
Right now, the current zoning, I believe, permits warehousing.
No.
I'll have that. right
Some
now.
of it's
I'll have
ours.
somewhere too.
I think,
Yeah.
I believe the current zoning permits warehousing in the IC district. The master plan recommends making warehouses conditional uses in certain districts rather than regulated.
The new master plan does, the other one, it was an accessory, correct? Well, you have-
You're allowed to have storage as an accessory, a large warehouse would be.
Okay, but on page 42 of your recommendations, you have right here, proposed warehouse setbacks, and you have building sizes up to 500,000 square feet.
Yeah, the master plan, we specifically recommend, the current zoning requires for any warehouse to be treated just like any light industrial use, which setback would be like 50 feet, maybe 75 feet per. Master plan does recommend enhanced or increased setbacks for warehouses, as well as making them conditional uses rather than outright.
So we can change that to a giant warehouse put there, which was recommended by our Economic Development Commission back in May 5th of 2022, where we had them come in for a 560,000 square foot warehouse and 300 parking spots. And let's see,
Cindy,
they also wanted to do quite a bit. No, I want to know, can they do it
I
now?
just wanted to
Can
say
they do it now?
that-
That's what I want to know.
But there are, again, we spent a lot of time on restrictions and buffers. So, although what you're reading is,
That's correct.
is reflecting what the study showed, or the revisions showed, but you're not looking at the restrictions. When you start to apply all those restrictions to certain size warehouses, it'd be pretty hard to find a location to put something that big.
Well, they did want to, Jim, just to let you know, okay? They did do quite a bit of research, because we did a redevelopment zone, if you remember, which we all had to pay for. And we put a lot of money into it to, find out that, no, let's just go with Plan B now. We'll go back to the master plan, because the first one didn't work. Now, I don't know, looks to me, and I'm gonna say this, it just doesn't seem fair.
Cindy,
That-
can I,
But spot zoning, to me,
You really need to
when you're
focus
allowing
in, you
somebody
need to
to
focus in
farm-
on the restrictions.
I said one at a time.
No, I just said that there are a list of restrictions as it relates to size of buildings. And it makes it almost impossible to find a location that would suit that size of building.
Just so I'm clear, the properties we're proposing to rezone here, this is the map.
Thank you.
It's not in there.
Page
This
45.
big piece
Just
isn't in
these
there.
ones on the front of the street.
Right, but this all here right now is RA. And
The yellow is already.
No, this is RA, yes, you're correct. This is all the houses that are across the
And then
street from it.
pink is our
And
interchange.
so when we come out, where we all live, 150 to 200 homes back here, he wants to put in a traffic light and all this. So that's why our concern is, when we get to mega warehouse with a lot of traffic,
The only thing being supposed to be rezoned is the existing.
which he owns all but one.
No, that's not true.
Well, that's what they say.
That's not
I'm only
true.
going by what the tax.
Okay, but I'm telling you that's not true.
Then it's because of that.
He owns a lot of them, but he doesn't own them all. We own
Majority of
some.
that property already is, interchange commercial.
Right, but we didn't approve warehouses, and now I see it that it is. And, you know, I have a problem with that, but, you know, it's on your court, right?
The manager can also recommend more severe restrictions on that.
Thank you. So, state your full name and your address.
Mindy Curran, 71 Edgewood Ave, Malaga.
Ms. Karen, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes. I don't know if this applies right now. It's more about the buffers, and the Fazland area. There seems, I'd like it if they could be required, whoever does anything, or even retroactively ideally, that there be a greater buffer and greater responsibility to a buffer when you decimate trees along a highway that blocked sound for residents. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
There's no buffer.
Right now, the town code generally requires buffers between commercial and residential uses for side or rear yards, not necessarily along the front yards. There is a town that doesn't do that, I think Howell Township, where it's require buffers for all property as well. But only the town can consider right now the town code.
I guess I'm asking the town to consider and keep to,
Your reference is to Route 55, correct?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no buffer. You know, they were just allowed to cut down all the trees, and
Well, that's because they're farmers, and farmers get to do whatever they want.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
whatever. So if you could just kind of keep that in your mind, that there should be extra responsibility to the landowner if they're going to clear land, or there needs to be a much larger buffer along the highway to protect the residents that had become accustomed to quiet and are now not allowed that. That's all.
Thank you. Any more comments from the public? Please come forward.
On 725. Before you state your name,
Margaret Dower,
please come up to the microphone.
Margaret Dower.
And what your address is.
I am on Forest Road, Floral Road, Forest Road.
You're still in it.
1806, Flora Road. The Vineland mailing address.
And, raise your right hand, and you swear that the testimony you're about to give before the following is the truth.
My opinion is going to be the truth.
That's fine, thank you, it's all, listen, it's all testimony, I understand it's your opinion.
Just want to know what we're going to vote on. In other words, when the public portion is done, are you going to vote on tabling this for now about the buffer zones, or are you going to move ahead?
Motion's been made to table.
No, wait a minute. There's no motion been made to table.
All this board is doing is making a recommendation back to the town regarding 0725. What I think the board is considering doing is recommending to the township committee that this ordinance 725 be reintroduced at the same time a buffer ordinance is considered, so that the two can be adopted at the same time.
Thank you, Jackie.
The buffers that were revised in the recent review.
According to the master plan,
Yeah.
that's correct. This board's not taking any action, they're only asked by the township committee to review this and report back. That's what we're going to do.
Okay, and I mean, when you read in the when you read in our plan now, the buffer zones, they sound safe. Now, I just heard you saying that there's no buffer zone for the front. I didn't know that. For the front yard?
Current code doesn't require, somebody wants to put in highway commercial or wherever, they want to put it in commercial use, that requires those buffers if they're adjacent to a residence. Let's look at the buffers in the side yard and the rear yard, they don't have to do anything along their front yard.
Oh, and
That's pretty typical. Usually a commercial business wants to have people see their business there. When people are trying to buy. Yeah, right now what we do requires anywhere from a 50 to a 300 foot buffer depending on the circumstances. And the side yards and rear yards where they have like when they're going to high point frontage, they're not required. Chelsea Drive or Harbor Highway frontage are not required. They have setback requirements, but they're not required.
And when township committee addresses the buffer, the proposed ordinance, when they get it and introduce it, there will be a public hearing on full section.
All right.
And sometimes when applicants have they have a plan that they bring in front of the planning board, something they want to build. For example, the solar field, we required significant buffers on all three sides. Actually, it might have been in four sides. So that doesn't, just because there's no buffer requirement for frontage today, doesn't mean that one wouldn't be required when the applicant has to go before a board. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody wants this to be rural, right? Does everybody up here want it to remain rural? Jason?
Well, I mean, I'm for proper planning, let's put it that way, so.
Okay, I would think that, it's just speaking to,
Well, I mean, saying something is rural is a matter of perspective. I mean, I've been in many parts of this country that would presume Franklin Township to be suburban, so it's kind of a subjective thing to say, to remain rural. So, yeah, I mean, we have you know, a state interstate that runs through here, two state interstates, so I don't really know how to answer that question. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Durr.
I didn't even hear it. All right,
Thank you. Anyone else on 725?
37 Elm Street in Franklin.
Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Wright, here, please swear to the testimony you're about to give.
So I am brand new to this. I have never been to a township meeting. I have never given comments. I am a teacher, so I do not need the microphone. Okay, that's
Not for
different.
amplification.
That's different. So my comments are basically just referencing the 2004 master plan, which is currently the most recent version available on the website. Someone does need to work on updating that. But going through that document almost kind of presages the issues that the township residents are bringing up at the moment. So in the 2004 master plan, the very first stated goal is to, quote, preserve the quality of life in Franklin Township with the following objectives. Number one, retain the rural character of the community. Number two, preserve open space opportunities through public and private actions. Number three, encourage farmland preservation in cooperation with the local agricultural community. And number four, strengthen ordinances that enhance community character. The overall tenor of that master plan is one reflective of residents' concerns about unchecked development and destruction of Franklin's rural culture. Indeed, the introduction of the master plan could have been written today by the residents in this room. Township residents have reported, quote, township residents have reported that they fear a loss of rural character that attracted many of them to Franklin Township. There is also increasing concern to maintain the natural environment that the community is justly proud of. 2004 master plan should be required reading for all members, not just of the committee, but for township residents whose views have not changed since its original authorship and must be both considered and respected. A few additional quotes that relate to the ordinance. Quote, Franklin Township thinks of itself as a rural community. Residents have reported in public forums they are attracted to the community by its open and rural character, and that preservation of its character is a high priority. Quote, when development has occurred, the existing zoning ordinance has permitted development patterns that are at odds with the desired rural character. Quote, the existing zoning does not promote the retention of that rural character that is cherished by Franklin's residents. Quote, in almost every instance, the amount of land zoned for the non-residential use greatly exceeds the existing development. And finally, quote, Malaga has become dominated by gas stations,
restaurants, and convenience stores that are far more characteristic of highway commercial districts than traditional village forms. If similar use emerges in Franklinville, its character could be destroyed. The zoning ordinance must offer protection to both the mixed-use concept and to the overriding preservation of the village character. Some of the most commonly used words in this master plan. The word village appears 29 times. Rural appears 24 times. The specific phrase rural character appears 15 times. Preservation is 14 times. Conservation is 12 times. The word industry does not appear in this document. The word economy appears only once in the context of the stated objective to, quote, expand opportunities for commercial and industrial development that complement Franklin's rural character. The proposed rezoning is antithetical to that rural character that has been part of our own planning for over 20 years. This is antithetical to the best interests of the township and its residents and to the words and plans historically codified by this very committee. It must be rejected by the committee's own established standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to close open public portion? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, so we are tasked to make a recommendation to the Township Committee. It's been suggested that we merge the buffer question in with the RAHC question, that they would appear in front of the Township Committee on the same night for ordinance review.
Well, yeah, the ordinance regarding buffers would have to be sent and then placed on.
Based on Ms. Halburn's suggestion, is there a motion to merge the two? Okay, that both would be submitted on the same evening.
Postpone adoption of 0725 until such time when the buffering ordinance is also ready.
It was tabled,
It's already been tabled.
So essentially, we're sending this ordinance back with no modification whatsoever. It's staying as it is, right? 0725. Right. Right.
And change the language to allow for buffers to protect the few residents that would change from
Yeah, I think we're getting
RA
way
to
off in the weeds
HC
there.
or IC. So that is a motion.
Just making a motion to make that recommendation to the township committee.
Okay, is there anyone here who would like to use the language and make that motion?
I make a motion to send 0725 back to the Township Committee in its current form, with the understanding that it'll be adopted in concurrence with modified buffer ordinance.
Under the master plan review.
Well, we're going to get the ordinance. So you can
Well, and consistent with the buffers established in the master plan review.
Well, the problem with the master plan review is there was no buffers established.
Well, I think there were.
There was no numbers assigned to them. Right.
The recommendation to enforce existing
Enforce.
make a few tweaks to the.
Yeah. I think there was. Yeah, I mean, there was a whole page with tables on these revised buffers.
Yeah, I don't recall that.
So we have a
Anyway,
motion by
yeah.
Mr. Brandt. Is there a second?
Second.
That's a roll call.
Nice time.
Joe seconded it. Yep.
Just with the buffering table is only for the warehouses.
Okay,
Not-
I think that's a primary concern.
That's a good.
Yeah.
Right.
That has to be adopted.
Yeah, roll call, please. Yes.
Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Maloney?
Yes.
Mr. Slade?
Yes.
Ms. Bear Bruno?
Defer.
Abstain.
Abstain.
Mr. Cavalier?
All the above.
Yes. All right, thank you. Next on the agenda this evening are communications. None? Chrissy? Okay, next on the agenda is correspondence. Okay, next on the agenda, minutes from May 20, 2025. Is there a motion to approve the
I'll
make
make a motion.
I abstain, I wasn't here.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jim
Okay,
abstains.
and Kyle. Jackie, do we need to go into closed session?
There is no need to go into closed session.
Thank you. Any last comments from planning board members? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn this evening? Is there a second? All in favor? Next meeting will be July 15th. Thank you, everyone, for attending.